In my last video, I talked about my experience of doing 500 hours of Spanish immersion over 6 months. And so in this video, I wanted to talk about a few of my favorite tips that I think can help you guys to get a little bit more out of your Spanish immersion. So the first thing is don't be afraid to repeat stuff. I've always prioritized interest and general enjoyment when choosing things to watch or immersing in general in Spanish, because the bottom line is that language learning takes a long time. It takes a lot of hours, and so I want to make the process as easy as possible to continue with. However, this has of course meant that I've been continually engaging with content that is decidedly above my level, but honestly for me, I've always found it a lot easier to re-watch something that I really like 5 or 6 times just to be able to understand the majority of it, rather than sit through a lot of content that maybe I can understand better but isn't that exciting or interesting to me. A lot of people worry about engaging with native level content because they're worried about not understanding it, but it's important to remember that you can always go back, you can always re-listen, you can reread a chapter, you can review whatever you're going through, you can look stuff up, you can search for translations and all those kind of things. And for me that's been very important, just the recognition and understanding that I don't need to feel bad or negative or like I failed if I'm watching something and I don't understand a lot of it. I just need to be patient and have time and be able to go back through it. So the second thing is to start narrow, go deep, and then expand.
Really? Nothing.
Now this might seem counterintuitive to a lot of people because you would think that you'll miss out on a lot of stuff. But aside from the fact that of course the most common words will repeat everywhere no matter what you're listening to, you'll be surprised at how much of the different vocabulary you'll come across within a specific subject that will actually transfer across to almost all spheres of potential conversation. And I found this to be really effective for me personally with the examples of diving deeper into language learning or basketball. So aside from the fact that I was watching things that I was already passionate about, that I was already somewhat knowledgeable about, the continual exposure to these subjects meant that I got really comfortable with the most common topics and all the most common ideas, and so I started being able to get more comfortable with the more advanced, the more abstract ideas, and I started to be able to pick up lots of cool new advanced or abstract words and phrases and things like that. And like I say, these weren't just words or phrases that you can only use when you're only talking about these specific subjects. A lot of things will transfer into a lot of other subjects. For example, when you're learning about language learning, you're not just learning about grammar, about verbs and nouns, you're learning about the idea of learning itself, of personal development. You learn about different people's philosophies, strategies for learning, methodologies, and throughout that you'll come across all kinds of stuff that not all of it's going to be relevant in every sphere of course, but a lot of it is. So I think it's a lot easier, especially from an organizational standpoint, to start narrow and go deep into one subject and then branch out. Okay, so the third thing is to try and translate as little as possible. So there will of course be times where it's going to be necessary or just a lot easier to translate, but I think that we should try and avoid translating things as much as possible for 2 main reasons. So firstly, translating just slows you down a lot. You're going to find it harder to just enjoy whatever you're consuming, but also a lot of the time if you give it a minute or you give it a couple of minutes, lots of things are usually reaffirmed or restated or reclarified in some way. So if you have a little bit of patience, a lot of times what's happening in a given scene or chapter or moment of something will actually become clearer if you just give it a second. But secondly, and I think more importantly, I think it's really important that we remember that words aren't just static pieces of information, they're representations of living and growing ideas. When we learn a word just through its translation, we get limited to this fixed idea of what this word is and what this word means. But I think if we want to develop a better understanding of the use of the language, a more natural use of the language, then we need to be able to allow ourselves to develop a more personalized and a more nuanced understanding of what these words mean and what kind of concepts they represent, especially as you start to get to learn more advanced and more abstract words and ideas. Another problem to limiting ourselves to understanding things through translations is we limit ourselves to understanding how that word works in our language, and often we will try and use that word in the same way in the target language. And as most of you will know, there's lots of examples where this doesn't work very well. Think of the idea of having a beer or having a drink, for example, in Spanish. We don't use the same words, the same verbs to have, to take in the same manner. When we focus too much on translations, you can fall into this trap of using words in the way that you would use them in English or in your native language, but that isn't always going to be how the word word is used in your target language. So try and develop a more personalized and nuanced understanding of what words mean by allowing your exposure to these words in a variety of different contexts inform your understanding of what that word means rather than just relying on a word-for-word translation. Okay, and the final point for today is to find worlds to dive into. So this final point was inspired by Lamont from Days of French and Swedish when I watched his video, How to Learn a Language with Game of Thrones. So the main point that Lamont makes in this video that I really liked was that learning a language or developing a deep understanding of a language is not just about seeing the same words in the same structures in exactly the same way over and over again. It's about seeing these words and these structures over and over again in slightly different variations and immersing yourself in this new world, so to speak, like a big saga, a really long story, really long series, something with a lot of content that you enjoy watching, allows you to build a certain kind of comfort with the main characters, the main storylines, the locations, the main sort of topics, things that are talked about in the show or within that content, but also exposes you to these slight continual variations. And so after I watched this video, I realized that this is actually something that I think I've done a lot in Spanish, and I think it's helped me a massive amount. For example, I started to watch a series called Gran Hotel when I started my challenge of 500 hours in 6 months, and that was the first series that I started to listen to without subtitles. Now, it's not a huge story, there's about 50 or 60 hours worth of content there, but there was enough there for me to build this kind of comfortability with the main characters, with their main motivations, their main ambitions, and these main sort of storylines, whilst continually exposing me to slightly different variations, slightly different changes in the plot, slightly different things that they were doing in a given episode. And I feel like I saw a noticeable improvement over that period of time. Listening to the same characters, the same voices, everyone doing more or less the same kind of thing, but with these slight variations, this slight level of unpredictability, I think was really helpful for me in developing my understanding and my comprehension. And even now, at the moment, I'm pretty much addicted to what I'm going to say with a relative amount of confidence is probably the best series ever to come out of Spain, which is Aquí no hay quien viva. And it's just a show about a group of people that live in the same block of flats, basically, but it's really fun and I love it. But there's a lot of content. The episodes are about an hour or an hour and a half each episode. There's about 140 hours worth of content, I think, and then there is actually another series after that, a different version, but that's a whole nother video. Anyway, again, it's something that I can immerse in where I've got this level of consistency, but there's always these new things coming in, and because it's a long series, there's a lot of content, it gives me plenty of time to build this level of comfortability with the characters, whilst also being exposed to the level of unpredictability that each new episode brings. So to sum up, find big sagas, long series, soap operas if that's your thing, or even YouTube channels that upload every day. Find a way to immerse yourself in a new world that allows you to build that level of comfortability with the things that are regular, whilst also exposing you to a small amount or a good amount of unpredictability with the small changes that you have, you know, with the plot and the new characters and different stuff like that. And so yeah, those are the 4 things that I wanted to talk about in this video. I feel like I could probably have talked about all kinds of different things, but I wanted to try and keep this video relatively short and concise, something that I'm never usually that good at doing, so hopefully this has gone quite well. If you disagree with something that I've talked about in today's video, or if you feel like there's something that I've missed out that's very important, please let me know in the comments below. I always like to hear from you guys, and it's really great to see new subscribers and new fans every day, so thank you to everyone that's supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the next one. Hasta luego.